Good evening, distinguished panelists. I'd like to inform all of you that we are live now. We'll just wait for 3 minutes ahead of starting our session. Uh, just give us a few minutes. I think Dr. Vidur Mahajan is yet to join us. I will request all our panelists who have not yet switched on their videos to please do the same and to kindly keep yourselves on mute and unmute at the time of your respective addresses, please.
Your slightest wishes are command, Akanshita.
Good evening, good evening. I'm just trying to, I think we have a very strong participation, for today. We've got a very overwhelming registration response as well.
That's good to hear. Akanksha, you will be monitoring the questions that people will be sending out?
I will check that. We will share, I think, some of the questions with you directly on your, either me or Vidhi. One of us will do it.
Okay, fair enough.
So, Dr. Lodha, a pleasure having you on the panel. I went through your profile, very impressive. We will connect separately after the session. You, Dr. Mahajan, an amazing set of people. Your work's very fascinating, and I think it should be a discussion we should carry on beyond this workshop.
Good evening. Good evening, everybody. So happy to be here. I think certainly happy to discuss further and learn and take it forward. Thank you.
So waiting for Akanshita now.
Dr. Kar, may I request you to please switch on your video? Thank you so much. Dr. Kar, I believe you've logged in from 2 devices. As long as there isn't an echo at your end, I think we're fine. Otherwise, you may have to log off one of the devices.
Looks like there is. Can you hear me now?
Yeah. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I welcome everyone to this very tight deliberation on AI in healthcare, an impending revolution. I will welcome our distinguished panelists lined up for this 1.5-hour deliberation. We have with us Dr. Ashwini K. Agarwal, Director, Government Affairs, Applied Materials, India. Dr. Suraj Rengarajan, Senior Director in India, CTO, Applied Materials, India. Dr. Kiran Atre, Senior Manager for New Business Development, Applied Materials, India. Dr. Professor Rakesh Lodha, Division of Pulmonology, Intensive Care, Tuberculosis, All India Institute of Medical Sciences. Dr. Sujoy Kar, Chief Medical Information Officer from Apollo Hospitals. Ms. Geeta M, Data and AI Excellence Capability Lead at the Philips Innovation Campus. Dr. Vidur Mahajan, Head in R&D, Center for Advanced Research in Imaging, Neuroscience, and Genomics. I welcome all of you. I will now request Dr. Ashwini Agarwal to kindly deliver the welcome remarks. Over to you, Dr. Agarwal.
Thank you, Akanshita. Thank you, CI, and a warm, safe welcome to all the attendees and distinguished panelists. We are taking this workshop in the backdrop of the COVID-19 pandemic, and it underscores the increasing role of life sciences in serving humanity. Application of AI in life sciences is increasing year on year for delivering favorable patient outcomes with performances that are comparable, if not better than human interventions. AI tools are now seen as something that brings increasing productivity, more efficiency for the healthcare professionals. Of course, AI is more predictive than prescriptive at this stage as the causal basis of the science are weak. So how can the Indian healthcare system mine this opportunity, valued at nearly $3 billion by IDTech-X and growing at 36% CAGR? How can it mine this opportunity effectively? How do we enable the technology landscape with appropriate regulatory interventions? For sharing the tech perspectives, I invite Dr. Suraj Rangarajan, Senior Director and CTO, Applied Materials India. And Suraj, your topic, your audience.
Thanks, Ashwini, and thanks, CIA, for organizing this event. So let me just share a couple of slides to set context. I hope you can see my screen now. Yeah. So for those who do not know about Applied Materials, just a few words. We are the #1 semiconductor and display equipment company in the world, a Fortune 500 company based in California. Like the life sciences industry, we are very R&D intensive and IP rich, very global, in 19 countries. And on the left-hand side, you see the Applied Materials office in Bangalore in India. We have about 5,000 employees based out of India. So Applied Materials basically is founded on materials engineering. And this is a very good visual to show how what we mean by materials engineering and using precision materials engineering from an atomic scale into production. So this sort of represents how we employ metrology in our semiconductor manufacturing. So in this visual, you have an aircraft at about 200, flying at about 200 miles per hour, about 5,000 feet above New York City. And you're able to detect a dime on the street and even read what's written on that. That is the equivalent of the precision that is employed in a lot of the metrology solutions that we use. Inspection is one of the key steps in materials engineering that we deploy in the semiconductor industry. And when we look and when we use one of these inspection tools for looking at a 300 millimeter wafer, we are able to image defects at an atomic scale on these semiconductor wafers. And that's what makes a lot of the chips that you use in your cell phones and all that viable. So aside from semiconductor industry, we are also using our expertise in materials engineering in many other industries. So if you see this slide, we have listed many other big inflections that we see happening in the next decade, where materials engineering will play the key role. AI, big data, energy storage, additive manufacturing, coatings, and engineered optics are some of the few. The one that we are going to talk about today and focus on is life sciences. And here, the expertise that we bring in is imaging. That's what I talked about, something that we use currently in our semiconductor space. And using this and applying AI to that will help the life sciences industry get faster time to clinical insight. One of the things that we are also applying based on our sensor and big data expertise is PAT in pharma manufacturing, and also our precision thin film atomic coatings that we have used in the semiconductor and display industry help us fabricate specialty coatings that we are planning to deploy in pharma for packaging and also for some of the process steps. So these are areas where we believe that technology can bring big impact to life sciences. So as a first step from the imaging perspective, this is a solution that we recently launched. Veranome Biosystems is a brand that Applied Materials has launched. This provides spatial analysis at single cell scale. This is a solution that we are working closely with the Genomics Institute in Singapore. And this is something that we are making available to the life science industry at large. And we believe that this, combined with a lot of the AI systems that we are working on, will come up with many more solutions that we can then deploy in the life sciences space and will accelerate the AI in healthcare that we're going to talk about later today in the rest of the discussion. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Suraj. May I now request Dr. Kiran Atre to kindly introduce the panel and take this discussion forward. Over to you, Dr. Kiran. Please unmute yourself, Dr. Kiran.
Can you unmute from the back end?
Yeah. Oh, sorry, I had trouble with the non-responsive computer screen. Right, thank you, Akanshita. Thank you, Suraj and Ashwini, for the quick introductions, and to CII as well for organizing this webinar. Very good evening and welcome to all the speakers and the attendees for this evening's webinar. The subject of which, as we've already discussed, is AI in healthcare and impending revolution. We have an esteemed panel of speakers this evening, and we will have the chance to hear from them shortly on their views on AI in healthcare and how India as a country is poised and should prepare for the imminent foray of AI in most aspects of healthcare. It will not be all pervading, but it will be there in most of the things that we do look at, and it will change the way life sciences is administered in the near future. We have already heard from Suraj about how a semiconductor equipment company like Applied Materials views the applicability of high precision engineering and high throughput systems in life sciences. Over the course of the next hour, we hope to hear from doctors, multinational corporations, and startups as well on the crucial role each of them will play in this space. The advantage of a space like AI is everyone has a role. It's not going to be a winner take all. It's going to be a consortium approach that's going to make a difference to the market. And that's one of the things we want to be able to try and bring together with this webinar. Each of the speakers that you will hear today will address the gathering on roughly about 10 minutes time that has been allocated to them. At the end of this, we will have time for a quick round of Q&A, so please do send in any questions you may have for the panelists, following which my colleague Ashwini will take us home by summarizing the discussions. Without further ado, let me introduce our speakers for today. Up first, we have Dr. Professor Rakesh Lodha. He's from the Division of Pulmonology at the All India Institute of Medical Sciences. Dr. Lodha is a professor of pediatric pulmonology and serves as the editor.
We lost Kiran.
We may have lost Dr. Kiran.
Hello? Yeah,
Okay,
I'm
yeah,
back.
you're back.
Sorry,
Yes.
had a power outage here. So sorry, as I was just introducing Dr. Lodha, he's the professor of pediatric pulmonology and serves as the editor of the Indian Journal of Pediatrics. His research interests include the use of AI in pulmonology. He has authored several peer-reviewed publications and books, and today he will talk to us about the doctor's view on AI in the clinical space and the specific concerns that they may have in utilizing some of these tools in clinical space. The next speaker we will have is Dr. Sujoy Kar. He's a Chief Medical Information Officer at Apollo Hospitals, and he previously held the position of Director Medical Services at Apollo Glen Eagles in Kolkata. He also serves as adjunct faculty at IIT Kharagpur for the Healthcare Analytics program. Today, we will hear from him about a framework to develop, validate, integrate, and deploy clinical AI solutions for better adoption among clinical staff. Our third speaker for the day is Ms. Geeta from Philips India. She's a senior director and has close to 35 years of experience in the software R&D industry. She leads the research team in healthcare solutions at the Philips Innovation Campus. She has been a big supporter for the adoption of digital technology to make healthcare much more accessible and affordable. Today, she will be talking to us about how Philips views the shift in healthcare as AI has adopted. How will technology change and what is needed to make the promise a reality? And finally, we will have Dr. Vidur Mahajan, the head R&D of Center for Advanced Research in Imaging, Neuroscience and Genomics. He leads the R&D team at Caring Research and has been at the forefront of building the world's first end-to-end testing and deployment platform for medical imaging. With a combination of being an MBBS and an MBA, he brings a unique perspective to technology in life sciences. And today he will talk about what does Caring Research provide, what has been their experience in the adoption of AI in India from a laboratory and from a patient perspective. We hope this will lead to some really creative and innovative technology solutions as we move forward, and we hope this is just a start of many more interactions to come. Without further ado, let me now hand you over to Dr. Lodha and his talk.
Yeah, thank you, Kiran. And I thank the CII for the opportunity to participate in this very interesting discussion. I'll just be sharing my slide to share my thoughts. Okay, so are my slides visible?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Yeah. So I'll predominantly be covering briefly about where the applications could be and what could be the concerns, as well as just give a glimpse of some of the work that we have been doing with our collaborators. So healthcare, as we know, there are different components: prevention, promotion, and curative. And as doctors, very often we are predominantly focused on the curative aspects, and the component of artificial intelligence, machine learning, predominantly kind of at this time point is in this particular space, where the idea is to simulate or mimic human cognitive abilities of comprehension and analysis of medical and healthcare data, especially in complex situations. And there may be times when one wants to go beyond the usual human cognitive abilities, the kind of things that we see, and to what extent we can analyze would also be dependent on kind of data that come in. And I'll just take a few examples later in my talk. So the idea is to see how we can combine the two, how we can use the power of computational capacities that we have and which are kind of growing exponentially in improving the healthcare. At this time point, predominantly, we would be interested in diagnostic or prognostic kind of situations. So at this time point, where potentially these applications could be there. So one big space is the diagnostic space, where imaging, pattern recognitions and all, that's where it kind of comes from, be it radiology, looking at pathology, or things like fundoscopy. There's been a lot of work in diabetic retinopathy and similar condition. The next set of conditions and these are just some of the examples, are prediction of events. So when we have critically ill kids or adults in the ICU setting, we would want to know whether they're going to develop critical events, and if we can identify those events or predict those events maybe a few hours earlier than they actually are detected currently, we may have a window of opportunity which potentially should lead to improving outcomes in these very sick patients. The scenarios in which it may be applicable would be, one is a setting of resource limitation. And I essentially mean that resource limitation in terms of maybe manpower, for example. So maybe at a district level or a primary health level, where we may not have specialists, can AI be a substitute for specialists? And some of the work, again, some examples around diabetic retinopathy or interpretation of imaging or seeking, care of a cardiologist, those may be the applications where this actually may be relevant. This another scenario could be where we generate a lot of data, but we at this time point, we are not using all of that data, and whether the machine learning and all could actually help us interpret or use this data more efficiently. So imaging, as I said, there could be just a couple of examples, and I'm sure there are going to be more from other speakers. Let's say in children, we would be interested in knowing about whether the X-ray, we are able to identify pneumonias accurately or diagnose tuberculosis accurately. In adults and all, whether we are able to pick up the malignancies and all, earlier than what we would have picked up otherwise, maybe on a routine X-ray. Same thing may be true for more sophisticated imaging like CT scans or MRI, whether these can be the machine learning components can cut out the inter-observer variation and maybe give us more accurate diagnosis. Same thing would be true for pathology, reading or interpretation of slides, be it, tissue diagnosis, histopathology, or looking at cytopathology. Then we come to the clinical. This is what we do. Let's say this is a fairly complex situation. A kid in the ICU, surrounded by all sorts of gadgets which are meant to be sustaining life, and all of these and the monitoring devices like these are continuously, capturing a lot of data. When a human eye looks at it, it kind of looks at it as it's just a snapshot that you look at, and you just compare that snapshot with a snapshot that you had in mind previously. Whereas this is a huge amount of data, and if you could utilize these data for making better predictions or better interpretation, I think that would be wonderful. So in a complex care scenario, typically an ICU setting, we have complex situation, we have multiple organs affected. There's a huge amount of monitoring that's taking place, both in terms of equipment and also, the one which is done by the healthcare professionals. At the same time, this is a population which is also at risk of serious events, both, during the natural course of the history, and also some side effects that may be related to the therapies and the procedures that we as healthcare professionals perform. So certainly in these kind of settings, one would want to have early warning systems which could predict serious conditions like serious infections, healthcare associated infections, hemodynamic instability, organ dysfunction, systems which could actually pick up medication or prescription errors. And that's kind of one of the serious concerns that one is always trying to prevent to, take care of any potential harm which may come in from these. Just a quick overview. There have been multiple attempts to do so to try and detect septic shock, let's say a hemodynamic condition associated with severe infections. And this particular score was had a specificity of about 67%, sensitivity of 85%, and kind of promised to identify patients about a day earlier before we would typically would have identified. And this seemed to perform slightly better than what currently available tools are, which use only, maybe 1-point data set for predictions. So here, this is, let's say, on this figure, we have various parameters that are being, monitored, and these are monitored on the resolution maybe every second to maybe every 15 seconds, and that's a huge amount of data. And here, you potentially, with use of various computational applications and algorithms, one could potentially try and predict an event which was supposed to be picked up, or let's say develop or typically picked up here a few hours earlier. So this is how it may look like. The septic shock onset when it's detected. You may have certain criteria by which you may be able to diagnose it earlier. Now, this is one. Similarly, our group, and we worked with Dr. Tapritesh Sethi at IIIT Delhi. This was to try and use simple thermal imaging in an ICU setting and kind of build in machine learning to see if we could have continuous monitoring and identify a child who's at risk of shock. So the current models, this was published a couple of years back, had a area under the curve of about 80%, and for prediction of shock 3 hours later. So this has still been worked upon. Now, Obviously, for clinicians, when you look at a certain thing being diagnosed or predicted, it's in itself is not enough. It's only when if we have this information and we are able to have good interventions which could potentially change the outcome, only then it's actually meaningful. Otherwise, it's just going to be another piece of information that would be available to us. So people have kind of systematically tried to study this and looking at simple things like heart rate characteristics and very low birth weight neonates. This is what was done, and here essentially they did it as a form of a trial. One team of clinicians or one set of babies, the monitoring results were displayed, and the others it was masked, and then they kind of looked at whether it had any impact on the outcomes. So in early results, it seemed to suggest that uh, the group which had the benefit of the monitoring and the data available from heart rate characteristic analysis, there was some decrease in the mortality from about 10% to 8%. And similarly, there was a trend towards increased days alive and being ventilator free. So these may be clinically relevant outcomes. If we just say that we are able to predict an event early and it doesn't change the meaningful outcomes, it's unlikely to be put into clinical practice. Now, when we talk about the challenges, I think the challenges kind of come around with the accuracy of models. In certain scenarios, we would have to, while we may look at the area under the curves, the discriminatory value of various models, look at the sensitivity, specificity as to how accurately they are able to predict. One would have to put it in context as to how many more people we may be, falsely be diagnosing or expecting that there's something to be done, and if there's an intervention associated with it, that's going to bring in with it it's some cost and also potentially some adverse effects. Second issue is about the generalizability. So typically people may work on a particular kind of a data set or let's say certain form of imaging, and then if we try and extrapolate it to another population, it should work well. And at times there may be concerns about some of these, particularly some of this has been seen in detection of retinopathy, where models developed in a particular area may not work in the other one, and so on. And finally, as I highlighted earlier, that we need to be able to demonstrate benefit of whatever is developed in terms of clinically relevant outcomes. Now, one of the challenges that we see is also the quality of input data. So a lot of these models and all would be developed based on existing data sets. And we need to look at, that annotations or the quality of input data are actually meaningful. Many of the Indian health systems still do not have electronic health records, and also verifying the accuracy of these records, that may be an issue. Finally, any such innovation should be able to fit into the existing workflows. If it disrupts the workflows, the benefit that it kind of promises, people may not be willing to apply it. So I think that's something that we need to be looking at. At the same time, whatever is developed should be explainable, it should be trusted, and at the same time, the ethical aspects of huge amount of information that we are collecting from individuals, those also would need to be taken. So with this just a brief presentation, I'll again thank you for the opportunity, and I acknowledge Dr. Pritesh Sethi, our collaborators' inputs for the work that we do together. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lodha. That was a very informative talk. I completely concur with you that we do need to look at what is the clinical relevance of some of these AI applications. I'm sure we have a few more follow-up questions on that, and we can get to that towards the end of the web conference here. I would now like to call on Dr. Sujoy Kar.
Thank you. I would probably have to move from one device, two devices to one device, and then go ahead and give my presentation. If I can just get 2 seconds. Am I audible?
Yes.
Yes, you are.
Right. Thank you very much for this invitation and allowing Apollo Hospitals and me to actually work on, talk on this, the work that we have been doing for past 2.5 years, developing different clinical AI tools, programs that we have been doing. And we thought of, developing a framework which would help us in both the development and practical implementation of clinical AI solutions for the hospital. We now have close to about 20 different programs that we are currently running, out of which about a dozen of them are currently deployed with our EMR. And there is a cycle with which we would actually work with. So just to begin with that concept of the cycle that we actually work with is to do a step one, that is the ideation, and go back to our clinicians, doctors, to look at what would be the potential clinical area where AI ML model will actually benefit the physicians, patient, the hospital workflow, or even for a digital platform. And the second step is, once we go through that, is to actually look at the data that we have in our disposal from the data that we have been collecting, and a EMR that has been existing with the Apollo system for about 15 years now. What is the data that we get out of it, and how we can de-identify the data and take it forward. The third step is then to go and do a lot of analysis, modeling, and come out with solutions. The fourth, of course, is a very strong ethics and regulatory background. Take it to the IAC approvals across the different locations where we are doing the study, and then apply to CTRI, ICMR for registrations of the work that we do. And then there is a continuous validation process that we do with external data collaboratives, which includes people from MIT at Maastricht University in Netherlands, and about another 6 institutions across the different parts of the world, where we are actually trying to bring in multi-ethnic geographical entities to come in and share the data, or even in that case, we never actually get their data. We expose our algorithm through Azure network, and through that we are able to get the validation done for our algorithms that we are currently working at. We have over half a dozen of collaborators at this point of time. And then we move on to publication, presentation, to actually important things. Our papers have been published in scientific reports, in BMJ, in Lancets, in the way that the process that we actually do all this in-house work that we have been doing. And one of the important aspects is to actually do the API integration with the EMR and to see how these models perform prospectively as we go ahead. I talked about the consortium and networks, building data collaboratives for validation, calibration, and co-creation mode. And of course, at some point of time, to look at it, how we can actually look at it from a commercial platform. To do all of these, what we actually looked at is to bring out a framework, what we call as EASE, where we have the principles of ethical consideration, the principles of adoption, the suitability of actually looking at AI as a solution for a particular clinical workflow, and seeing how it is going to enhance. Because for us, it is always that the AI would not be able to replace the clinician. It is how AI can augment the performance of the clinician to deliver much more in a better way. And lastly, the last E of the E's is actually about the explainability, how we make the clinical AI models and components of digital health much more easier for understanding and implementation. I just quickly go into certain kind of things in terms of ethical perspective. The first one is the safety and non-maleficence. In one of the reports that we came up with World Economic Forum in December, the primary thing, the objective that we looked at in chatbots, AI chatbots, or even use of AI as in clinical areas, is to see how we can make safe and products which would not lead to any kind of maleficence for the patients or for or bring in any kind of unavoidable harm or unintended consequences in that way. And we see that, as we go on more deeper and deeper in using different AI tools, there are always higher chances of automation, and that's where possibly we would have to look at different perspectives of harm in that. So I want to give you a couple of examples here, and these are all from MIT Technology Review. This was the first one that we actually looked at. The AI-driven dermatology could leave behind dark-skinned patients behind, which means they are trained on models which are from, patients who are mostly whites. And when they were being interpreted on people who were colored or dark-skinned, they were actually giving a lot of false information around that. This was the second one where we actually talk about equity and personalization. People where there is an algorithm which would look at follow-up care, admission or readmission to hospitals. One of the famous hospitals in Boston who were using this algorithm, and they were leaving behind people with color again. So these are some of the very important issues around AI use these days, which we would have to look at as we go more and more deeper into using them. And the last one is about, we know that there is an overaged population and it's an aging population, and it's an ever increasing load on that, and they would go and use these chatbots. We need to understand when they are going to pull into right kind of triage and decision making and handovers. I'm going to focus on handovers in a couple of slides from now. There are ways by which we can improve on the accountability. There is a framework that has been given by Raji and Smart et al., which also includes the famous Timid Gebru from Google or ex-Google now. It's about how do we use design, how do we use structural vulnerability over a process to actually see the improving accountability around developing these models. And then look at the efficacy in terms of how retrospective versus prospective studies can actually help in that. We see that a lot of studies on retrospective data gives us wonderful accuracy, AUCs, sensitivities, PLR value, likelihood ratios and all of that. But when we see in prospective trials, those ratios or those results or metrics actually come down crashing. And that's one of the concerns with AI these days, that how do we design these prospective studies? How do we ensure that they hold good, not only on the retrospective or trained data, but also on prospective things? And also look at certain, checklists that are report is one of the very basic checklists and very useful ones in that way. And then Professor Lodha was talking about, in clinical reality, what are the metrics that we should be using in terms of efficacy? How do we define them? How do we look at AUC precision recall versus predictive values versus likelihood ratios and all of that? Quickly moving into accuracy, I just want to give you a quick story about the workflow that Dr. Lodha was explaining. Google's medical AI, which we looked at retinal images, was doing an excellent job in their in the labs. But when this was taken to the ground to actually get the maximum out of it, what we found out that it was designed to reject images that fell beyond certain threshold of quality, and it was seen that that kind of quality of images we were not getting out of the field. We were a part of this research as well. And it was a wastage of time in retake or edit the images. And then the whole concept of poor internet connections, how we would look at it over a period of time to ensure that there is a supply, internet supply at the ground to actually even use the different AI tools. Integrity, Forbes calls it as an Achilles heel of AI. We all know about this, that there is garbage in, garbage out, and over 80% of time spent in AI projects are actually about cleaning data. The last one from an ethical consideration is fairness and inclusivity. What we are seeing world over is that there are marginalized population. There are populations who are getting left out in these models. And also in some of the ways that we are actually using data sometimes exposes vulnerability in population. We know that, when we started linking Aadhaar with the patient's medical records, there were refusals from people living with HIV and tuberculosis to go and get their drugs. So, we would need to see from a digital health perspective, from an AI perspective, whose good are we doing when we are looking at all of that? And finally, when we are looking at it from an ethical consideration, we need to understand where bias can set up in our system, where these can happen in the model development, this can happen within interactions, this can happen even in the deployment phase. And we need to work on ensuring that how geographical, temporal, and other bias even between two observers, which is often in the case of imaging, needs to be taken out of that. So when we look at the adoption, again, the important features look at interoperability, universalization, calibration and benchmarking, clinical relevant outcome, and lastly, and most importantly, about patient safety. How safe is the system that we are trying to design? From a suitability perspective, the first thing that we need to do, if even the AI would actually work on this, is to identify what clinical or public health problem are we solving. We need to address the bias, as I've already talked about, identify knowledge representation in terms of practical accuracy. And one of the big important things that we are seeing as we develop more and more of this AI solution and integrate, when do the clinician go and refer to the AI? And when do the AI have the capability to hand it over to the clinician and says, thus far, I have done my job, and this is what is my limit, and I cannot go beyond that. That is very important in understanding and decision-making in clinical process. Of course, the last one is actually about the explainability. How people will trust AI is about building trust in systems, understanding different what-if scenarios or counterfactual reasoning as we looked at. And we do a lot of work on causality to understand, it's not just about prediction, but on a longitudinal scale, how do you go about saying that the decision that you took at that point of time is actually going to be one that would improve 5-year survivability or in a cancer therapy or something like that. And finally, look at it from a new clinical insights, which would help you in understanding drug interactions or others as you move on in that way. These are some of the slides that I have for the things that we use a lot. Tripod checklist, prepare clinical trial data protocol as you are preparing for any drug research, and you use the same kind of format to actually build on that and take it for ethical review, even for informed consent, bring in the components of the clinical research and also the components that comes with Data Protection Act or GDPR, and then take them together to actually build a perfect solution for getting informed consent for people who are using clinical AI or on which the clinical AI is going to be used on. This is my last slide. At the end of it, we would have to understand how the future of AI is going to be in healthcare. We need to understand it from the perspective of governance, that what is the process of decision making and oversight? Is the benefit around it is clearly articulated? Have we evaluated and communicated the risk of using AI in healthcare appropriately? Are all stakeholders able to participate properly? And then why are we doing this? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Kar. I think you have very nicely stitched together all the various concerns of prospective studies, the tech challenges thereof, and of course, all of this with an overriding eye on the ethical concerns. How do we protect the patient and ensure they get the best care? I think there are some of the challenges which we will have to answer, and hopefully we will find those answers. And it dovetails very well with next speaker, Ms. Geeta, and Philips has been in the space of AI in healthcare for some time, and we hear from them how they view it and what are the challenges that they've been facing. Ms. Geeta?
Thank you, Kiran, and thank you, CII, for giving me this opportunity. Actually, the talk, which very, very interesting. I really liked what Dr. Suyog was talking about. Matches very well with what I would like to also address. So let me share my screen. Is that visible?
Yes, it is.
Okay. So like Dr. Kiran mentioned, right, I would like to talk about how Philips is looking at AI within healthcare, right? And for us, Philips is a leader in healthcare space. And we have been working in diagnostic imaging, as all of you would probably know. And more now, we are moving into the solution space of healthcare. And within this solution space, what we really want to address is how do we meet the customer needs? How do we make sure that the equipments and the solutions that we provide to our customers, such as the radiologist, our doctors, and the hospitals, to enable them to make sure that they are delivering the appropriate care, resulting in the right patient outcomes. Yeah. So I like this slide about the quadruple aim. This is the slogan of the healthcare industry, right? I think it's a global one, but it matches very much with what we are trying to do in India also. One of the key aspects of care is to lower the cost of care and make it more accessible to everybody and affordable across all the levels within the society. Also, the staff experience. This is a very important aspect of which we have come across in our day-to-day interactions with doctors and radiologists, where there's a lot of burnout, not only because of the amount of work that they do in taking care of their people, but it is also about the technology. Having too much of interactions, such as data entry to an EMR, etc., other than just looking after their patients, causes a lot of burnouts and creates stress. Finally, what we want to achieve with all this is improved patient outcomes and improved patient experience too. Yeah, so when a patient comes to a doctor, instead of the doctor being busy with his devices or with some other technology, it's important that the patient feels connected. He knows what the doctor is trying to give them. So in all these aspects, we feel technology plays, of course, a very big role in making this a reality. And in addition, AI as a technology will definitely help us to make this smoother. So just want to touch upon the challenges that we face within the healthcare space for AI. AI is pretty common across many industries. If you see the financial sector, they have implemented AI to a large extent very well. But within healthcare, it has the challenges that are a little bit more different. One of the aspects, what I would say, is that we need large amounts of data with appropriate patient consent and privacy protection also enabled. And that data has to be curated, and it should be, that is when you can have your AI models developed on that curated data sets. What does curated and clean database really mean? It means that the data that is fed to the algorithm that is learning from that particular data is annotated. And how do we get the data annotated? It is, again, you have to go back and rely on our valuable time and expertise of our radiologist, in fact, or even the other specialist, to properly identify what are the key elements that the algorithm should learn about. Yeah, where are the problems? Where is the cancer located? And segment it, etc. So there's a lot of pre-work that you have to do before you can get this AI algorithm to learn from it, and you can deploy it effectively. The other aspect is that something my previous speaker also touched upon is transparency and trust. If you have a black box which is giving you a decision, it's not going to be easy to trust that particular black box. So it should be very important to explain how a decision has come about using this particular algorithm. So the explainability of an AI is absolutely important. And the transparency and how you actually arrived at the algorithm is also very key. And how you make that visible to the customers or to the end user who is using the model is also something that we are working upon effectively on the space. Combining data and the knowledge-driven aspects is also very important, right? It is not just about feeding the data into a model, a deep learning model, and getting the result of it. Basically, you also have to train it with the appropriate features, the knowledge of the experts, saying this is the right way and these are the right elements that the model has to pick up and learn from. So that is a very, very important aspect. So you cannot do it standalone. You need the expertise and the knowledge that is already there. The last mile connect is a key aspect, right? That's if you see the way we spoke about the workflow, where does it fit within the entire workflow within the hospital chain is another area that we have to tackle. And fundamentally, once this algorithm is deployed within a hospital, no, and the algorithm is in use, you need to have review cycles with the clinicians. Every time you need to know whether the algorithm is giving you the right decision, whether the AI is actually looking at the data in the right way. The previous speaker rightly mentioned, right, when you are doing this data development or the model development using data from the retrospective data seems to work well. But once you have deployed it in the hospital, there's some changes that happen with the real world data. It modifies, it is responding in a very different way. So that means that the clinician should be aware of what are the changes happening, and there should always be this human in the loop of this workflow to make sure that the right decisions are taken. Of course, when you deploy such a new technology within the environment in the healthcare in the hospital or in the industry, there are obviously new ways of working, and everybody within the place who are undergoing or looking at this usage has to be trained to adopt to this new way of working. So there is a need for change management, there is a need for proper education and empowerment also at the right levels. So that entire the process of deployment is also made effective. Yeah. So it is not just about the technology piece, it is the entire process, it is the training, it is the people aspects, everything that has to be covered if you have to make AI successfully implemented within the industry. The other important aspect that we have faced with is the healthcare IT infrastructure itself. If you go to a hospital, we have the infrastructure from the IT from various different players, and they are sometimes very department specific. So there is the cardiology department has got its own IT system. Maybe the radiology department has got something different, and they're not interlinked. Yeah, so there's no connection between the two. And it's important that if the AI model has to be successful, there is this data pool that is coming in, right? There is a lot more data access, and that can happen only if you are connecting different systems together. So that plays a major role in helping us in deploying or developing AI in a much more successful fashion. The other aspect that I would also like to touch upon it is, in addition to the data piece, to add to the data piece before I go on to the development part. When you are trying to gather data, you need data that is actually findable, easily findable. That's what I meant when I was talking about the infrastructure, which is fragmented. If it is spread across different places, then you spend a lot of time and effort going collecting the data. So it should be findable, easily findable. It should be accessible to the right people. So people who can access the data, and it should be available for developing your models. And it should be interoperable. That's another important area. And reusable also, right? If you collect data for a certain algorithm, it is important that you should be able to reuse it in some other area also, because that's the power of reusability. So fair data is an important aspect that we need to think about. So and the other aspect is the data has to be, when you're going about gathering the data, it's important that the data is, you not only look at the quantity of the data, you also look at the quality of the data. How diverse is the data? Yeah? Is there any biases within the data? Does it cover all the necessary conditions and cases that is required for the algorithm to be successful? And finally, after the gathering the data, I mentioned briefly about the annotation piece. Most of the time goes in the labeling and annotation. In the other industries, it's easy for pictures to be annotated, right? You can even do crowdsourcing and get all the labels into the pictures for identifying, I say, for example, very simplistically, a cat and a dog. Many people can do it that easily. But in the healthcare industry, it is not so. Yeah, you need specialists. You need people who have years and years of experience to do this. So it's very expensive. It takes a lot of time. And simply assuming that just the data it's actually the strongest determining factor of product quality. Yeah, having the right amount of data with the right quality makes a lot very important aspect for developing good AI and reliable AI models with the right level of accuracy. We also touched upon, I think, on the accuracy levels that is required for the AI model, right? What is good enough? Yeah, if you really want something which is about 99, 98%, very easily you would probably achieve an accuracy about 80 to 85%. But moving the needle from the 85 to 90 takes a lot more effort, a lot more data, and that means a lot more investment. Then is that worth the investment? Will is really giving you the return on that investment, or can you do it with a lesser accuracy, but with also the human intervention as required? So those are the kind of things that we could also think about when we are deploying these solutions. So the deploy test and the develop test and the deployment phase, especially when you have the algorithm deployed within the hospital, you need to make sure that you receive feedback, continuously monitoring what is exactly happening with the model, how does it behave in the real world scenario. And that's a very important step. Yeah. So within the hospitals also, you need to come up with ways and mechanisms and even processes to audit regularly on how the AI model is currently performing. And without this step, maybe AI will not really deliver on its promise of saying that it is a clinical decision support system, right? It is always be something which will be supporting in terms of maybe the operational workflows in the simple areas like workflow improvement and staffing in allocation, etc., managing a hospital, but not really not really in the expertise level that we are talking about. Finally, the monitoring aspect, where we need a lot more accuracy and you need to continuously monitor. This is also something that FDA will has come up with some draft papers, and they are trying to say that this is a very important aspect that has to be in place before we deploy decision-making kind of algorithms within the hospital. So these are still, I would say, things that are evolving as we are progressing in this technology. So just to talk about the FDA part of it, what do they really talk about? For example, if you see this thing, when the algorithm recognizes an audio, and it was just for ordering your radiology workflow. So there is the way you can set your priority. If there is no nodule, maybe you can the radiologist can look at it later. But if there is something important here, the algorithm can make sure that as per the workflow, the radiologist gets attention to it immediately. So the priority of this one is moved up in the workflow. So obviously this is not medical devices, so it need not be regulated. But if the algorithm is talking about saying that, there is something here with something which is amiss, yeah, so, and it points it out like a screening tool, right, to the radiologist, then it is also okay. Still the radiologist is making a decision there. It's just providing him additional information maybe, and drawing his attention. There's a low risk here, and therefore it is also not an FDA regulated device. But if there is a high percentage of chance that it is malignant, there is something that is really that the algorithm is deciding, and it is clearly saying that this is a malignancy, and it is providing the decision, then of course FDA puts in a lot more controls and a lot more because the algorithm is taking a lot more risk there. So the intended use is where the FDA regulations would step in. Similarly, this is another example about segmentation. Just for sake of time, I would go to the last one. To just like to conclude by the talk, what the quote which I may have from our Chief Technology Officer from Philips. It is basically technology is not the hardest part, right? Any change that is driven by the technology is not the hardest part. But the most important aspect is how do we get this technology accepted, trusted, and embraced by people? That is where it will make a difference. And for AI, this is most important because the trust, transparency, and what it can bring to the table, it is important for people to accept it. And the only way we can bring all this about is making sure that the right governance levels are provided, the right kind of rules and processes are in place so that people are comfortable sharing their data, right? If they're sure that the data is de-identified and it is made good use of, and their consent is taken before data is used, then there will be a lot more acceptance for sharing of data. With that, I would like to conclude my talk. Thank you.
Thank you, Geeta. Very informative talk over there. Definitely scaling up of these of the data sources as we start building more and more algorithms is a very big challenge. And that's one of the questions I would look for an answer. I'd ask Dr. Vidur Mahajan now. As a smaller company, how do you deal with this requirements for increased processes and a lot more resources and costs involved as you start building your own company? So, Dr. Vidur, we'd like to hear your journey and how you've come out to build the case that you have right now for the company.
Sure. No, thank you so much. First of all, Kiran, for inviting me to this panel. Like you have some of my heroes on the group, so it's always an honor. Maybe what I'll do is, I know I have 10 minutes. I'll set up a timer. I'll quickly share with you what we are up to at Caring, and then maybe go a little bit into detail about Carpal and how it tries to solve some of the problems that Dr. Joy, Dr. Geeta, have brought about on the AI domain. So essentially, Caring, the Center for Advanced Research in Imaging, Neurosciences and Genomics, we are the R&D wing of Mahajan Imaging. We already work very closely with Philips, and we think of ourselves as a translational product group, right? Where we take things that others have built and then try to force fit them into clinical situations, and then try to squeeze out as much value from these tools as we can. And that is how Carpal essentially came to the fore. So very quickly, I don't think anybody on this panel would debate that AI is the future of medicine, right? This is almost a rhetorical statement by now. There's a huge market. It improves outcomes. Like, we've seen it in COVID, like a lot of the genome sequencing, vaccine development, drug repurposing, a lot of that had AI at the back end. And there's no doubt that it's slated to reduce costs, right? So AI is certainly the future of medicine. We are investing heavily in it. We like publishing papers, so we were privileged to publish the first paper on deep learning in the Lancet with Cure.ai. We ran the validation for their algorithm, and then subsequently, a lot of our work is in the domain of explainability and metrics for explainability. So this is a new almost a classification metric that we've come up with, where we get radiologists to infer as to whether the reason the AI is giving an output and a human are giving the output are the same, and then try to do some math around that. So a lot of this algorithmic auditing, Geeta ma'am was just, you use the word audit, ma'am. It makes my heart, beat faster whenever somebody says AI and audit in the same sentence. And then, work on unboxing of AI, where, how do you open up the so-called elusive black box of deep learning? And synthetic imaging is another thing we are very, very big on, especially from a security standpoint. Like, can we put some malicious code into an X-ray machine that starts spitting out lung cancer when there is none, right? So those kind of crazy things also we do. And we've published, we presented more than 100 papers at global venues, all on validation of AI, deployment of AI. So AI is everywhere, right? Now we have customers that are publishing papers using our software, media coverage, etc., etc., etc. But oh yeah, and we have a very, very comprehensive research portfolio, right? So these are all the algorithms that we've done something or the other for with various of our 40 plus collaborators that we have. So amazingly rosy picture, but hardly anyone is using these things, right? If you go to most hospitals, except where Dr. Sujoy is, if you go to most hospitals and you ask them how much AI are you using, you will get back a look of complete shock and oh AI, how can we use AI and all that, and we believe that there are three reasons for this. The first is very clearly there's just too many algorithms out there now. Like I think this number is now 600. I was speaking to some industry analysts and they said there are 600 AI startups in medical imaging, radiology today. If you add the academics to it, there might be tens of thousands of research groups. And then, you have the powerhouses like Philips and Siemens and GE and NVIDIA and all these guys who are also building this, Applied Materials as well. That is one challenge, right? How does a hospital even access this wide plethora of AI that is out there? And it's all very niche, right? Somebody is doing head CT, somebody is doing chest X-ray, somebody is doing liver MRI. Very difficult. The second is around trust, and we've spoken about it enough. But how does a doctor know that the AI will work on my patient population, on my equipment, on my premises? Right? You will never hire a colleague or even an assistant without actually interviewing the person, right? You may get somebody who's gotten a degree from the best college on the planet, or FDA. But that doesn't really mean that you will not interview that person, because that person is going to be performing a cognitive task. So, but there is no interviewing mechanism for AI today that exists. And then lastly, and Geeta ma'am again alluded to this, is that the health IT integration. This is just to show that $6 billion are going to be spent on just IT integration, which is, to my mind, absolutely mind-blowing, right? But it is not an easy task to deploy these algorithms into the clinical realm, right? So given these three very basic challenges, we went upon a journey to build a software that connects all these things and enables healthcare providers to do all of this. So how does that work? So Carpal, which is our software platform, it's a decentralized platform, right? So our vision is that it will connect the world of AI developers to the world of healthcare providers, and in between also integrate the health tech providers. And these health tech providers are your PACS companies, your HIS companies, your RIS companies, Philips, Siemens, GE, all of these people who essentially control the IT at healthcare providers, right? So this is our vision, and for data science teams, they get to develop, validate, and deploy their algorithms again through Carpal. So we have a bunch of tools that enable all of this to happen. And for clinical teams, they get to access, assess, and adopt, right? Again, it's basically the same thing, right? Developing, testing, and deploying is kind of the same as accessing, assessing, and adopting. And our goal is to have a single window where this can happen, and your IT integration gets reduced to simply a configuration. That's it. You choose your AI, you choose your configuration, you can test it on your own, everything in one single click. And this is kind of a higher level view, right? Instead of thinking of the AI providers as an ecosystem, you think of it as the whole analytics ecosystem. And on the other side, instead of thinking of the healthcare providers as an ecosystem, you think of it as a data ecosystem. And then, of course, we are nothing without the intermediary health tech layer. So this is what we're trying to build. This is in fact the first time that I'm talking about this on such a webinar. But the end goal is to enable anyone to be able to manage their data, annotate their data, run inferencing, no matter what AI you have, test the AI, figure out bias in models yourself, right? You should not need a data scientist. They have much more bigger problems to solve than helping you compute a sensitivity and specificity, right? So all of those things can be automated. And deployment, my God, deployment should, there should be a system, and most PACS systems actually allow it, where you can, call an external link from inside an existing pack system. That's all you need to integrate AI, right? These are our features. These are just some nice looking screenshots of our platform, where you load data. So again, think of it as a connector, right? You are connecting a data science team and a clinical team. So you need a common repository of data. So Kiran, you were asking, how do we manage our data? Very, very simple. We load it all onto Carpal, and then we curate high quality data sets using text searching, which is very, very basic Boolean search. If this report contains pneumonia and it contains chest, but it does not contain tuberculosis, show me the report. Very simple kind of algorithms, but very, very, very powerful when you're dealing with hundreds of thousands of reports, or even millions of reports. So this is how we do it. Like, no hospital should need to use Excel to do these things, right? You open a million rows in Excel, you're done. Like, your computer will crash. So we've kind of optimized things for that. We've built out a full annotation platform, because again, radiologists like to view images. It's a cool opportunity to get them to make a bounding box on the finding, right? That's it. Every radiologist, many people don't know this, but every radiologist is already doing this or good radiologists are already doing this on their viewers. So they will do it inside the Philips IntelliSpace portal or inside the G Advantage windows, where this mark gets lost forever, because simply it goes onto the film or the CD and then it's gone. Like, you can't extract it, because it becomes what is called a secondary capture. So what we're saying is, you replace that with something like our viewer, where every annotation is then tracked and used for future AI validation, development, whatever you may want for it. And then this is we are the only ones in the world who are crazy enough to build this. This is a full-fledged AI validation platform, where you can tweak performance thresholds and figure out optimal sensitivities, Matthews correlation coefficients, etc., AUCs, and all those things, and also do real-time algorithmic auditing. But more importantly, you press one button and out pops a validation report with a bunch of false positives and false negatives, all that a doctor can view on their own. So and then the last piece with which I'll close is the AI deployment piece, where simply you configure a DICOM node, or you configure an HL7 API, and you get kind of an orchestration layer through which you can select, okay, I want to deploy Stanford's checks next algorithm into my packs, and there's a very simple way of doing it. So in a nutshell, I just wanted, since there was only 10 minutes, I just wanted to give the world a bit of a glimpse into what we are doing and why we are doing it in India, right? India is amazing because not only do we have the world's best doctors, I will say that with a lot of pride, but we also have the world's most diverse data. And we have hospitals such as Apollo that are generating this data and putting it into structure. And we have diseases of the West, we have diseases of Africa, we have diseases of East. So we are kind of, it's an unfortunate thing, but we have all the diseases of the world. So why should we not use it to our advantage? And we are simply trying to build out a platform that enables everyone to do that. So with that, I thank you for your attention, and I hope there's a truckload of questions at the end. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Vidur. It's a very impressive platform that you guys have built, and it definitely does tell the story that connecting all these pieces and bringing everyone together on the same platform is a very, very crucial piece. As the famous African proverb goes, if you want to go fast, go alone, but if you want to go far, go together. So I think you've definitely shown the way for us to go far, and hopefully we will continue them. On a lighter note, I'm surprised people require AI to realize that their ACL is torn. Yeah.
Oh, people need doctors for that also.
Anyway, coming back to some of the questions, we have quite a few questions that have come in, and I think the first question was on how do we see the scale up and deployment of AI solutions in public health settings or large settings like rural India, and would you worry if AI might take away some of the human element of medicine that's in place today? I think I'll ask Dr. Lodha to talk about this question.
Okay, thanks. So I think, as has kind of been amply clear with all the presentations, that I think AI is there to, I guess, assist or maybe improve efficiencies of the systems and not really replace the human. That's how I would look at it. It's not about, kind of talking high about our profession, but I think that's how I look at it given the way it's going. A whole lot of it still depends on a lot of information and other things that have to be generated by, let's say, a trained healthcare personnel. And it's just to aid them. So certainly there could be applications that one may be looking at, where deployment may be happening at the field level. But I think at the same time, we should be, in terms of deployment, it should be very clear it's not going to be a substitute. So if, let's say, there's a requirement for a specialist care at a district hospital or so, saying that, okay, we're going to install some of these, which gets you the diagnostics or some predictor, but you still, the person would then have to travel to a city to get the care. That's really not meaningful. There has to be a continuum of care where the AI built-in solutions improve the efficiencies and, make the care closer and more efficient for the person. It certainly could happen in a public health setting as well. And I think it's just the tools that you're going to use. So maybe if you have smartphones, your connectivities or the broadbands and all are better. We don't have glitches in terms of what kind of data. We have solutions which can be running only on the the smartphone with whatever processing capacity it has. So I'm sure there are ways and means. I think the technology part is with the advancements and all of that is deployable. I guess the challenge is how we fit it into the workflows and how do we fit it into, making sure that the end of that particular solution is there. So if we diagnose somebody with a condition early enough, we still need a person to be able to treat that individual appropriately. So unless all these things are in place, it's, it may not yield the desired benefits that we all think it's going to be there. So it's certainly deployable, and I think the government systems and all also would be open to deploying these solutions. Obviously, it would be the scale is going to be something variable because even that deployment needs a fair bit of financial resource. So it's going to come in. Certainly, it's going to come in. We just need to make sure how the best of it is made out. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Lodha. The next question we have is, due to this need to tailor AI-based models on skin tone and demographics, do we feel like there is going to be an effect on the business viability of AI? I think I will direct this question to Ms. Geeta from Philips. Do you see that the constant need to train and retrain algorithms or develop newer models with every region that you enter being a hindrance to business, so to speak?
So it's a very interesting question. No, it is the way we develop the models. Like I said, no, when you are going to a different market, for example, if you have developed a model in Europe and now we want to introduce the same model within India, it is very important that we make sure that it is actually validated with the data from India. It is important because there will be certain differences from the European data and the Indian data. So it is not about the business case as such. I think even if you're deploying a solution, not only for AI, even if you are developing a different kind of product or a solution, we would have probably gone through the same exercise. Yeah, developing only for the European market and not testing it in India, I wouldn't say it works, right? You always need to validate with the larger diversity of data.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Sujoy, the next question I will direct to you. So you did point out how there is a lot of work going on with the academic institutions in the US. MIT was one of the institutions that you had mentioned. Do you see a mature enough ecosystem within India for AI and healthcare being developed, or is it still in pockets? Is there something that we could do to try and encourage more AI research, or is it simply because EMRs have not been as widely used in the Indian ecosystem as we would like? What are your thoughts on that?
A very good question, actually. So we have definite challenges, but we also have a brilliant opportunity. Challenges, as rightly pointed out over the course of discussion, the EMR and integration with the EMR were talked about. Public health in the previous question, which is about, again, I come back to the report that was there for the Broadband Commission about the internet connectivity, to the peripheral areas for people to actually use this tool. How do you put this in the hand of an ASHA worker who would be using AI at that point of care or at that level? Those are kind of things that you would have to think through. But I don't think Indian academic environment, particularly in data science and AI, is any far behind at this point of time for the work that is happening, whether in Stanford or MIT or Delft or anywhere else in the world. We are equally doing very, very great work in that, and we will be there. But I think on that note, there is one thing that in India, and Fidur just showed that in a very, very impressive presentation, I must say. So we can leapfrog and go to those things that probably they did as, they found out over a period of, say, 20 years or 30 years of research. We can actually do it in 2 years or 3 years of research and leapfrog into that and move into something which is probably going to be much more effective for Indian population on Indian data collected in our own systems and taken from there on.
Yeah.
Thanks, Dr. And Vidur, another question that I have for you. So you guys have been in this journey for some time, and it has been a long and impressive journey. But is there anything that the government can do to enable healthcare data in the entire ecosystem? Is there some policy that you would like see enabled, which would kind of bring everybody together under the umbrella, make it easier for things to be adopted? What are your thoughts on that?
Sure. So, Kiran, one thing that we've been always trying to advocate for, both formally and informally, is around having a data policy and not a data privacy policy, because that is coming out. But data privacy policy is all linked to identifiable data, right? So, what happens to Vidur Mahajan's data? But what we are lacking in terms of clarity is what if I take 200,000 MRI scans, strip them of all patient identifiers, and open source them for the world to use, right? Because if you think of it today, so Stanford's artificial intelligence in medical imaging is AMI group, is one of the world leaders in AI for healthcare today. And they have I think they have over the past 2 years open sourced some 600,000 chest x-rays, a ridiculous number of echocardiograms. And like these guys have basically made it their mission to take all of Stanford's data, de-identify it properly, and open source it. And now what happens is, as a function of that, you have people in engineering colleges in India building tuberculosis models using data from Stanford. Yeah, which is amazingly strange. So but the thing is, us as a diagnostics provider, I am scared today. I want to open source 100,000 MRI scans, right? But I don't do it because what are the implications of me open sourcing that, right? We open sourced a small data set of 500 CT scans. What we released it along with the Lancet paper. Then we open sourced a small bunch of COVID-19 data. But we are just unable to take that leap of going ahead and the government literally saying that, okay, go ahead, open source this. We are with you. You're doing it with good intent, and it's not like the data is being sold or anything. You're literally just giving it out there and saying that, hey, world good, solve an Indian problem. So that is one clarity that we would ask for. Of course, regulation, all those things will come in due time. But I think that if we build a product that is useful, truly useful, it figures out a way into the market. But right now, this data thing is a bit of a question mark. Like, I don't think it's just a hindrance. Please, Dr. Jess.
Yeah. Thank you. The last question I had is an
I think
open
Dr.
question.
Joy had a comment, Kiran. Sorry.
Sorry, Dr. Joy, were you saying something?
I agree with Dr. Vidur here, and we would have to find out ways in which that the data don't travel, the algorithms travel, and how we are going to deploy these algorithms into data sets of the different countries. You can't access an European data at this point of time, and no matter whether the Stanford data are now open or public source, if you want to bring them outside the country at some point of time, it requires layers and layers of regulation. So I think what we would need to do here is to form data collaboratives across the world, understand who all people will be joining in those collaboratives, prepare algorithms, and have those algorithms, travel through cloud computing systems, whether Azure, AWS, Google Cloud, and all of that.
Thank you. So the last question I have is nearly out of time here. Is more of an open question. I welcome any of our panelists to take it. What would the adoption of AI, what is the role it would have in the retraining or training or retraining of healthcare professionals? I would give the example that since the advent of Google Maps, people have displayed an inability to navigate without Google telling them where to go. Is that something we should worry about as AI starts invading spaces? Who would like to take that question?
Sir, I can take a shot at it if nobody else wants to start. So the way I think about that, Kiran, so I also run a pathology lab, right? And I'm sure most people here have worked in or looked at pathology labs. And if you look at the way pathology has, and I mean routine pathology, right? Biochemistry, immunoassay, kidney function test, hematology, all that. If you look at the way that has evolved over the past 20 years, like literally today you put in blood and you get out a number, right? And there's a bunch of black boxy things that happen in the middle, all of which are very deterministic, and all of which have QA mechanisms built in to ensure that if my whatever urea or creatinine is 1.2, it is indeed either 1.21 or 1.19, but not 0.5. So, and that enables a pathologist to sign out 1,000 reports a day, right? At least in the field of radiology, that's the aspiration that we have, is to be able to build out mechanisms, QA mechanisms, that enable a radiologist of today who's probably reporting 40 or 50 MRI scans in a day to report 250 MRI scans in a day, right? It sounds like a crazy thing, but if you would have told someone that Dr. Lal Path Labs would be doing God knows 50,000 tests a day 20 years ago, it would have been a funny thing, but today it's reality. So I think it's about setting the quality parameters. Training would happen, of course, as things start becoming more mainstream. Training automatically, I think, follows through. Industry will push for training, right? Because they need a user base. But I think as practitioners and developers of these things, we need to come together and start thinking about frameworks under which these algorithms can run.
Yeah. Professor Lodha, you had something? I saw you raise your hand.
I think, so that's the interesting thing. And I guess what the examples that you give, that's certainly a challenge in terms of training. So today people may say that, okay, you want to, in terms of clinical medicine, a lot of clinical skills they are threatened, I would say, their acquisition of skills by, invasion of technology. So today, or maybe at earlier, maybe 20 years back, people would be expected to diagnose cardiac lesions and all based on simply auscultation and in addition to history. Today, somebody maybe have a greater access to echocardiography, ultrasonography, and so on. And let's say, why spend time on getting the skill when I can have possibly a more accurate diagnosis with, one of these tools? Same thing is true with procedures. You would do all kind of, procedures with, clinical skills and observations. And today, let's say, even if you have to put in a central line, you would say, okay, I want to, do it under ultrasound guidance. Certainly, that has a benefit in terms of patient safety perspective. But then the training component, you may basically tie up a person that he or she could only operate in that kind of an environment. You take that person out and put it into a less resourced environment, the performance is going to be affected. So I think we need a mix where we make sure that all of these are built upon on a solid base of what the clinical training and clinical skills are. And I think that's how it's going to be more meaningful. Technology alone is not going to be, let's say, I think you still would think that you still need that human interface and so on. I think the example that Vidur gave is certainly that's an example that would be there when you're running, assays and other things. Now, tomorrow, let's say you wanted somebody to, a robo or something to really see, interact with a patient, examine a patient and so on. That's what the corollary would be. But apart from that, I'm sure, it's going to pose challenges to, the clinical training, and I'm sure one would have to find ways to keep up with time. One can't say that we're not going to adopt a good technology just because it's going to, affect our training. What we need to do is the other way around. We need to make sure that the basic training still is in place, and at the same time, people are aware and use the relevant technology to improve the care and the outcome. So I think, but it's a very, very important question. It's similar to, let's say, all the phone numbers. We hardly would remember one or two important phone numbers, and that's it. We all are dependent on the phones for thousands of contacts that we will never bother through it. So that's a pretty much a natural phenomenon that's going to happen. It's like a disuse atrophy or whatever we may like to call it. So it's something like that that's going to happen. So we just need to make sure that it's the appropriate technology in place, used appropriately. It's not a black box because it's going to lead us wrong as well. Means whatever is easy to do is also easy to do it wrong as. So I think we just need to keep it in perspective, and I think the hope that AI offers is certainly tremendous, and there's a lot of gaps to be filled up. But like with anything else, you would still tread that path a bit cautiously. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Professor Lodha. So we're out of time here. I'd like to thank all the panelists. It's been a great discussion, and I hope this will be a start of a lot more interactions between all of us, whether together or in pairs. But we will certainly hope this is just a start of many things to come. I now hand you back to Ashwini to take us home. Ashwini?
Wow. Thanks, Kiran, and thank you, panelists and attendees. This has been a fascinating session. Each of the thought leaders here have really contributed to expanding the horizons and the thought process on AI. Let me start with Dr. Lodha, and he shared the healthcare perspective with a focus on curative applications of AI with needs identified in imaging and prediction of events. The wish lists were very clear: early warning systems and systems to pick up medication and prescriptions, prescription errors. The challenges were in accuracy, generalizability, and the quality of data. And in fact, the quality of data is something which actually flows through the thoughts of most of the panelists. In terms of having quality data to build an explainable, trusted, ethical AI system. So Dr. Sujay's framework for practical implementation for clinical AI solutions was actually fascinating because it touched the ethical considerations extensively. Really loved your checklist that you showed in your slide set. And I think clearly the focus in building clinical AI algorithms is to enhance safety, avoid unintended consequences, and I think that is going to be an ongoing activity, totally dependent on how the data is actually generated, how it is actually processed. As Geeta ji talked of annotation and building up diversity scale, building up that quality and not just quantity of the data, which is actually the core to build making AI systems which are very very usable. Uh, if this is not done to a great extent, the technology will remain as a non-medical device application. But if it is actually polished up, it will start rising up the value chain as it delivers value and favorable patient outcomes. The role of AI in healthcare, the four-quadrant model that Geeta ma'am presented, clearly data is key to making this happen. How do you clean it, curate it, and that's where the costs are also there. So when we actually look at how India can really mine this opportunity, the key thing is how can we make sure that we collate our data resources in the country. How do we make sure that the strength that India has in actually having lower cost for cleaning data is properly evolved to actually making the data banks grow and get leveraged by Indian algorithms for creating solutions which can actually be taken to other parts of the world. And Dr. Mahajan's Carpal platform, what a fascinating innovation, Vidurji. I really loved it. Uh, I think somewhere we must actually interact a lot more on this. But you literally showed that your platform was building a complete workflow model, primarily aimed at bridging the gap between the data to the actual user via the healthcare providers. And wow, across the world of AI algorithms. So really, really impressive. I think the key to mining the data properly is also going to require a lot of regulatory interventions. We have laws on board, but those laws have to be fine-tuned. If we are talking of anonymization of data, which Dr. Mahajan talked of, it needs to be defined appropriately so that people can actually take that huge data that India has and use it effectively. Else, we are going to be trapped as a user of someone else's work, and our strengths will get diluted. So somewhere, I think we have a huge opportunity at this point of time in the AI space, where if the regulatory elements are properly addressed, if the industry's efforts in this area are properly addressed, the healthcare sector can actually see something evolve, which is very, very powerful. So on that note, I end this particular workshop. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. And we look forward to more engagements on this to develop this particular sector. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, and
Thank you.
bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.